USGS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, bee identification courses or sessions, whatnot. I'm Clare Maffei. My pronouns are she, her. You've probably received a million emails from me by now. I'm U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I am your facilitator here. So if you have questions, put them in the chat, send me an email. We're using these sessions both as an educational tool for you all, but also to improve the guides and just be here for you. So last week we announced that we could send out boxes of bees for practice, and we have received an incredible response and now have to close the doors on that list. So if you sent me an email, I have not responding to every one of them, but if you sent me an email, you're on the list. You're going to get them in the next couple of weeks. But if you're not, we will, if and when we can open that again, we will announce it at that point. I'm still working on creating a Microsoft Teams venue where we can all work together. I've had some great asks from some of you about getting specific genus or species of bees that we are not able to provide just because there are so many, and we don't necessarily have them organized like that quite yet. But I invite you to ask each other if there's somebody who has excess of a certain genus or family to talk amongst yourselves. But I think that'll be easier to facilitate when I create a Teams and a virtual gathering space for everyone beyond this class. Was there anything else, Sydney or Sam?
Yeah, think of anything.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to move on to Sam the man.
All right. Thanks, Claire. Should I turn on my speaker?
Yours is on.
Mine is.
Oh, I can mute mine.
Okay.
We do this every week.
Right.
There we go.
All right. I'm going to turn mine on, although I don't know why. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to jump back into the genera guide, and we're going to cover, in this case, Andrena for a big chunk. And if we cover that, we'll move on to some other genera. We're both learning how to identify the genus Andrena from other species for other genera, but we're also learning about the guide, what the characters are, what kinds of things you're looking at in bees, how to, in this case, we'll be spending a bunch of time on fovea. What is a fovea? What does that look like? This is something that everyone at the beginning struggles with in terms of Andrena. So female Andrena, males do not have fovea. So as a bonus section, we're going to start with a set of non-bees. I am going to share and go right to the microscope first, and then we'll get into the genera guide, jump right to the action. All right, screen one. All right, Claire, do you see the wasp?
We do. It's a little bit low on the screen, but yes, we see.
Okay, so bonus points for anyone who can identify this to genus or species. You can put that into the chat box, but this is what I would call a Crabronidae group species of wasp. We'll talk about it because it's often confused with bees. If you look at the wing venation here, it's super similar to bees. And in fact, they're in the same suborder, Apoidea as bees. So depending on the species, so this one I would consider to be very obviously a wasp, but sometimes it's like, am I looking at a wasp or I'm looking at a bee? And the wing venation is not that much help. I mean, there's some small nuances, but basically it's going to look very similar, usually smaller. But like, again, the key, in addition to just learning things, is to come up, and of course, if you want to, you can look for the presence of forked hairs, which is often the classic defining notion of a bee, but often in some bees difficult to find. But again, we look at the hind leg, okay, and here's the tibia, and here's the tarsal segments. The first tarsal segment, like in all of this group is relatively elongate compared to the later tarsal segments, but it's skinny. So, and that's basically one of the better ways to tell whether you have a wasp or a bee, is in general, the basotarsus is about the same width as the remaining tarsal segments. So as you can see here. So I'm going to show you that one. I'm going to show you another one. And again, please feel free to identify what we're looking at. I might call this maybe a tachysphex, but I really don't know what I'm talking about. So it's just a guess to make me look smart. And so there's the bee, but it's not a bee, rather the wasp. If we look again, here are the here's the hind leg tarsal segments. Let me bring this up. I'm going to come back to that. But again, if we look at the wing venation, a little bit different in a way from bees. Got this incredibly projecting submarginal cell out here. But basics, the basics are the same. And if you don't know that that's not what a bee submarginal cell might look like, you might also be confused. If we look again at the hind leg and look at the tarsal segments here, let's zoom in a little bit. If you look at the tarsal segments, we'll see that the basotarsal segment, so the most basal of the tarsal segments, is about the same width as the subsequent ones, or nearly so. In bees, and I'll try and remember to show this, that is not the case. Okay, now we're going to jump to looking at Andrena and keying it out and getting more familiar with the guide and getting familiar with some genera level ID issues around that genus. So we pull a specimen here. I'm looking at Andrena carlini. I got to get rid of the label here. So Andrena carlini is a very common, I just snapped its little antenna off. So let me get a different one. This is the problem with dried specimens and myself. I can be very cruel to them in terms of manhandling. So we're now putting another specimen back in here. And so in this particular case, we have a relatively dark Andrena. So you can see the scopal hairs back there are black. In most species, the scopal hairs in an Andrena are white. But you get all these variations because in the genus, in North America, there's over 500 described species, and there's a bunch of undescribed species that we run across. Mike Arduzer is running across, and different people throughout the Midwest and the East are discovering that, oh, well, we can't really key this out. Usually those get set aside, but now we're trying to tackle some of these last remaining unidentified species. So, and that means that they are not going to be in the guide. So it is possible, though not likely, right, that you would have an undescribed species in your collection. But that would be rare. So if you're thinking you have one, you probably don't. But so here we are. It's the usual 3 submarginal cell situation. There's again the marginal cell on the margin, the stigma for orientation. The scopal hairs in the female are more extensive in Andrena than a lot of other groups. So you have pollen can be connected to the basotarsus here. The tarsal segments not clear here, but we'll maybe see some other examples. It'll be on the femur. You have the trochanters with a lot of long, fluffy scopal hairs. Another way to talk about them, places where they can gather and hold pollen. And it's often difficult to see in a specimen on the flat. But this area on the side, this is hidden here by the leg, is also a pollen carrying spot. And it turns out that, again, while we can't really see this here, this area on the side of the propodium, the back segment of the thorax, is usually has hairs around, well, it's very variable, so it's a good character. And we'll return to this certainly when we're doing Andrena species, but there's hair all around the segment, and it's usually either bare or with a few sparse hairs in the middle. So that sort of format, morphological format, is usually termed a corbicula. So bumblebees have a corbicula, as do honeybees, on their hind tibia, so a bare spot surrounded by hairs. Andrena does not have a corbicula on its leg for holding pollen, but does in this relatively unique area. So most other species don't bother with trying to figure out how to hold pollen in this part of the side of the propodium. In fact, it's almost always just completely or nearly bare of hairs. But Andrena, they're big into their pollen, so they're trying to carry it all over the place. So that's one of them. Okay, so let's jump now to the guide and just start in on this. I think I will show you the most mysterious of, well, there's several, but this is one that people struggle with in the beginning. Now, being black, this is probably not a good example. Let me shift to another species here that I think we can get a better view of the, yeah, this is a little better, of the fovea. And this is another argument, looking for the fovea. This is the title of a book that we'll be writing, is something that people struggle with. And a lot of times this is argument for holding these specimens in your fingers, not like we're doing right now. In addition to speed, you can angle the specimen back and forth a little bit to show reflections of this area that we call the fovea. So fovea, I think in general, I may be a little bit off on my morphological definitions, is a hole or an indentation. It can be slot-like, or it can be like this. This is a relatively wide area. So, but often this is hard to see, and particularly because you don't know what you're looking for. So we're going to show several examples. So it's not the best looking specimen, but the fovea is, I'm going to outline in both sides. So it's on either side of the ocelli, and on either side. It's symmetrical. And this one, it's wide at the top and necks down, and the fovea runs like this and runs up, again, back around. So on this side, this is the fovea here, necking down, fairly narrow slot, coming back up, necking around. Because specimens, and here's an example, can often be dirty. Sometimes if you have a nice clean specimen, usually you will notice, because they'll be reflecting light in a different way, that the interior of this space here is lined with, I don't know if I can get any, oh, I can, is lined with very short hairs. And in this case, a lot of dirt and gook. But this is common. Like, this is reality of a lot of people's collected specimens, whether they're in bowls or whether they're in netted and put into a jar. You have to deal with dirt, and that's why we emphasize cleaning specimens, and we've learned over time to do that better and better. So here's the fovea again. Okay, there's the most narrow port, and you can kind of see that there's small prone lying down hairs. In this case, they're reflecting white, but in many, like that Carlini we saw, it was so difficult to see because the hairs internal to the fovea, and it has one about the same size, not as narrow at the bottom, are black. And so again, by angling the specimen back and forth against the light, usually you can begin to define where the edges of the fovea are, which are important because sometimes the fovea is only in this upper area. Other times, like this one, it runs way down, and that helps out separate out species. But as you go lower on the face, you tend to get more longer hairs that are the normal hairs on the face of a bee that often partially occlude the, oh my gosh, people are calling me. Let's see if I can get rid of it. Oh, at so many levels, I have technology problems. What was I talking about? So this area is also, we have workmen again in the lab, so all kinds of potential disruptions. And anyway, so the shapes can vary. So you can have short ones, you could have long ones, and you're going to need to peer through the microscope and the hairs and angle it back and forth, usually to see the base. This one's relatively clear because this is in the subgenus Trachandrena, has deep fovea, so the edges are often more apparent. A lot of others, the fovea is not so clearly defined by a physical structure as much as a shallow pan with the short hair. So this is something to get used to. Okay, so I've showed.
Wondering,
yeah.
Do we know what? Two questions. Do we know what the function of the fovea are?
I'm going to say no. I've talked about. People have discussed this in the past. Oops, I better put this screen back on. I've never heard a clear answer. So someone, though, may know that and should put it in the chat for everyone.
Okay, and then also, how do you tell how low the fovea continue? It looks like sometimes it can be obscured by the longer hairs I'm seeing.
Right. So the answer is, well, first of all, it's always a play conservative. If you can't see it, remember you have two, one on one side, one on the other. If you can't see it, then you might not be able to score that character, which might be the length of the fovea, which is a good character, and almost always you would want to score it if you could. But almost always you can figure out the length by holding it in the specimen in your hands and rocking it slowly back and forth, and at some point you'll be able to see the edge of the fovea through the hairs, by essentially seeing through the cracks. So it's almost always possible, but I will acknowledge that it can be tricky at the beginning. So this is where practice comes in and having known specimens to help you. And this is relatively wide, a relatively wide fovea, and in other cases, it can be, half this size in terms of width. It's almost always going to start up here. In fact, I think it always starts up here. I don't think it's ever like, oh, the fovea is down here. No, the end is the variable part. The top of the fovea is always in parallel or close to the line of ocelli. We'll do a little fresher here and figure out that this is a female. First of all, if it has a fovea, you already know what the answer is. Like that level of fovea, that wide fovea. Well, I shouldn't say that. Calides sometimes have a weird fovea. But now with this direction of light, this is why you're shifting. Look at how clearly the fovea shows up in this particular view here. So I'm not going to make any grand pronouncements about Andrena only having fovea. I forget what the cheat sheet says.
Can you show it maybe from like the angle under the microscope like this, so you can see sometimes how you can, particularly with the Trachandrena, the dip?
What do you mean by like that? Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's see what we can do here.
That's how Rob Jean showed it to me.
Okay. Yes, there are many views of fovea here available. This is Andrena cyanothi, by the way, from Maine. All right. So yeah, this shows up nicely because it's reflecting the hairs. Again, these could be dark. Most have white hairs, but there are quite a few that have partial dark, partial light, or all dark enough. So again, here's the fovea, always in line with the tops of the ocelli. It necks down. I don't know that that's visible because the antennae are in the way, but it's it's moving then down in a skinnier way below, which is again a general characteristic of Trachandrena, but not sufficient to tell it apart. All right, and can't remember if there's anything else right now, but I think we'll go to the guide and start keying out. I just wanted to point out those because they are things that people, some of these are special Andrena features that people struggle with. And in the long run, you should be able to just look at a bee and go, oh, that's obviously an Andrena, just like going outside and say, oh, that's obviously a blue jay. You're not looking up the blue jay in a guide and coming to that conclusion over and over. This is the part of the memorization curve. Okay, can you see the guide now?
We sure can.
Okay.
Don't forget to make this screen a little bit bigger.
Got it. All right. All right, we're making, this is the, just to, again, have people get familiar with the workflow here. So here's Discover Life, the main page. Click on the bumblebee as a shortcut. You could have gone through ID Nature Guides or a variety of other ways. You come to the Apoidea page, and oh, you could learn about the apoid wasp species, some of which we saw just a few minutes ago, and but that's not as well fleshed out as the bees. And we are going to use this internal jump, or we can just simply scroll down to here. And this is where all the guides are. We're still stuck here in the genera guide. So we're going to click on the genera guide, same format as always. Left-hand side has the, in this case, the genera that are possible. This is just got North American bee genera in it, although applicable to Europe in some ways. And on the right are a series of questions. So we'll move more quickly as we go through. So I'm going to skip this because I know that this specimen that I'm looking from is from Maine. And when I do Maine, ME is the shortcut. Now I can scroll over here, or actually I don't need to scroll over. I could scroll up or down and click any search bar, but I can also just click the enter button. So when I click the enter button, which is convenient sometimes because it's often faster to do it with your thumb than to go over and click on something. But actually I'm going to turn off my other screen here. Maybe. We've got two screens open. Sometimes weird things happen because of that. All right, I think we're good. So when the only thing I've done so far is click on Maine, and I've got now 36 genera. As you go north, there's fewer genera. So that was very convenient of me to now only have 36 to consider versus somewhere in like Arizona, where you have Andrena, but you have many more genera to wade through. But we're going with the specimen. So this specimen, it's Maine, and I want to make this more full screen. Oops, what happened there? That may be as good as I get that particular adjustment. For some reason, I now have to deal with, I'm going to bring this down one level. There we go. So now I can see everything and I don't have to scroll left or right because of this view. So I've got my screen magnified. So if I knew something about the, oh no, maybe I do. So if I knew something about the families, I could click on that. I'm going to say I don't. And are you seeing something?
Just switching your screens, ours might have frozen where we are. So
okay.
Just, I don't know.
Go back to there.
Yeah.
All right.
What are people seeing? Because I maybe
yours is frozen.
Frozen. I just see his guide.
Okay, I'm back at the guide, and I'm scrolling the guide up and down. What do you see, Claire?
It's just the states.
Everyone's frozen except mine.
Yeah, that's fun.
Okay. So over there, you guys, same thing. Can you hear me?
Well, I think we all have ours on mute, so we don't.
Oh, you don't know, right? Okay, so
We maybe stop sharing and.
okay, let's right. Okay. All right, stop sharing. All right. Now what? What do we see?
Now your face is there, but there we go.
Okay, I'm going to share again and try and get back in.
Let's do that.
All right.
Adventures in Wi-Fi.
All right. We see the guide?
We see the guide and it looks more appropriately sized.
Okay. And we're
Moving.
okay. It might have been because I pulled the other screen off and it was problematic.
Okay,
all right.
Before we move on, I had a question.
Yeah.
While we're on Andrena, are the species well known enough in the north central US, e.g. Dakotas, Nebraska, corresponding reliable ID guide?
I would say yes. So if you get to more towards the Dakotas, Western Dakotas, then you're going to be pulling in a bunch of Western species. The Andrena guide is scored for all the species in North America, I believe, but only cursorily, they've only been basically scored for the Western ones. In other words, we didn't try to, if we have a collision between several species in terms of the general scoring, we didn't write specifics to pull them apart. Mike Arduzer has a set of guides for what are basically the tall grass prairie area. I'm pretty sure it includes female and male Andrena. I could be wrong. If you go to Dan Carr's site where we put the videos for this thing, there's also a link to be able to download all of Mike's guides. They're traditional dichotomous guides, but we're also working with Mike to update Discover Life guides and move them further to the west. As I've emphasized before, often it's useful to look at several different identification streams when you're identifying things, particularly if you are in some head scratching area. Often someone else's approach will help you out. There are not many, but in the upper Midwest, Mike's guide is super useful. And I even have used it several times in the East, the far East, not the far East, but on the East Coast to try out some IDs, because I may be able to take an identification down to a small handset of specimens that Discover Life I'm unhappy with, or I want a second opinion, and I might look at Mitchell, and then I might look at Mike's guides. And in some cases, I actually look at the work of Wally LaBerge and his students who did a bunch of revisions of Andrena, but those get confusing because of the way he wrote them, but also because he's bringing in a lot of Western species at the same time, and he predicates everything on that what subgenus of Andrena you're looking at. Anyway, there's lots of, as we'll see more and more when we get to species, you start using multiple sources of information. All right, so anyway, we also are going to say, well, we don't know what the superfamilies are, and this is how you tell males from females. So just to quickly, because this is another key character, I'm going to flip to the scope here. And we're going to look at, not on the scope. I think someone may have their microphone on. You fixed them. Okay, Claire, the enforcer. Okay, so we're going to look at the antennae and look at and work on the, because again, this is another place where people have questions, work on how many antennal segments problem. There are, in a female, 12, in a male, I'm distracted by this. Still haven't figured out how to turn that off. And in the male, there's 13. And they all have escape and pedestal. So here we go at the end. So this would be the last flagellar segment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's see if I can do this just through focus. 7. Can't see it. It's a female. So we kind of knew that because we're a little bit familiar maybe, and we saw that it has what is pretty certainly pollen collecting hairs. As you get more and more familiar, you'll see that the scape here is longer in females, and there are other characteristics too. But just want to keep reiterating the use of the antennal segments as you're determining your sex.
Can you remind me if you count the scape in the 12?
Yeah, so scape pedicel are always counted in the count of antennal segments if you're doing the whole antennae, 12 in females and 13 in males. Okay, so that's just a note about that. Primary color, well, it's mostly a black without green, bright green, or a dull green. And now we're down to 32, so we knocked out a few. We're looking at the thorax or abdomen, and Andrena is still there. This is what you'll be doing with your own specimens. Like, I know the answer when I click on something, is the answer still present? Andrena is still present, so that's good. So in this case, we have thorax and abdomen markings on the surface. We're looking at that and say, nope, there are none that are markings. We dropped a few more species or genera. Here's Andrena is still there. Axilla shape, we covered this last time. It's not pointing out. It's conforming to the scutellum, and you can click on pictures as is noted before. We're knocked out a couple more. Now we get to submarginal cells, and we see that ours has 3, and we get rid of 15. But, and Andrena's still there, good. But if we had seen 2 and clicked on it, Andrena is also still there because some Andrena have only 2 submarginal cells. And word of warning, Andrena sometimes drops a cross vein in the normal 3 state to become 2, but usually one side or the other has the full 3. So whenever you're looking and you see a 2 submarginal celled Andrena, you should look at the other wing to see if that's true, or see if there's some partial vein kind of thing. So you should be suspicious. If you have any questions about that, then you just click it for 2 and 3. Okay, so we had 3, so we're at 15, so we're really lowering that. Last time we were looking at agapostumum, it clearly had this strongly bent or arched lower vein, and so we don't have that. I'm going to show this under the microscope. If I can click on this, why am oh, now my screen seems to be frozen. Let me try a, oh, my entire computer is frozen. Can you hear me? I don't know.
I can hear and see you.
Okay. Something happened there. Okay, we're back. So hopefully everything is still there.
Yep,
We're at
that's
15,
good.
and now we're down to 11. But let's take a look at this character in our Andrena. So let's see if I can find a slightly better view. How about that? So orientation, marginal cell, stigma, 3 submarginals. What we're looking for is the basal vein, which is towards the base of the, oh, this is a good example, of the cell. All right, just showing how tricky things are. We know this is an Andrena, and this is not straight. This basal vein is not straight down across, and it could be interpreted as having a strong angle there, but it's not interpreted that way. And this is the problem. Like, if you're an expert, you go like, oh, of course, that's not a strongly turned. It's not right angles, but it is bent, and it's not like the apex of that curve is in the middle. So it gets tricky. And if you are ambiguous about something, then don't use that character because a lot of times, like in this case, you have a awesome character, which would be the fovea, that you can use later. So, is there an example of what?
Of a bent one?
Oh, okay. We'll go back and look at a agapostumum with the super bent. Super bent. It's very technical. Thing. The so this is the bent wing is a, oh, there we go. is a characteristic, or the bent vein is a characteristic of elictidae usually. But as you see from that one, oops. So here is the submarginal cell, the last of them, and there's a stigma orientation. Here it is. It's sharper, not much though. So that's why the identification of bees is frustrating for the beginner, because if we go back here and compare to what we just saw, like, that is a little bit vague. But officially, I wonder if we scored it. Going back, let's get rid of that and let's see lower. We might have scored it for having that. We did not. So, you know, that's something that we should consider, because that was definitely a fairly arched, ambiguous, in my opinion, vein. But since I have the magnificent character of the facial fovea, I'm never looking at the veins. But again, as the beginner, you might
Is there some
do that.
cutoff angle in the curvation?
Is that a question?
Yes.
No, I've never heard of one. You know, it's, you know, the people who do guides, no matter what, they already know all the answers, and that's the problem, right? Because they don't need the guide. And so it's all this stuff that's in their head. They have these mind pictures that a beginner does not have. And we keep trying to correct that in our guide, but you can see clearly that I have just been consumed by the dominant paradigm of archedness of wings. And we probably need to add Andrena to strongly or bent too, because we just demonstrated that it looked like that. If we knew how to poll people, we could ask whether people thought that was strongly or not strongly arched. And then we would allow the people to make a correction to the guide, which we can do. We probably will do that. Note to self. Okay, now jugal to vanal lobe. Again, last time we talked about this as not something that once you get used to looking at specimens that you use that much. But just to look on this one, because every once in a while you end up like looking at the vanal and jugal lobe. So it's good to, we'll try and point out vanal and jugal lobes. Okay, this is the hind wing, very different venation. And in the back, most of the time, Bombus, for example, has no jugal lobe at all. It is gone. So we have the jugal lobe and the vanal lobe. They are just simply cutouts of wing, membranous wing material. Not really, doesn't have sclerotized markings, but you can see it's clearly there's two lobes. This, so it's going way back to the wing base. So when you measure these, this is, you know, quite substantial percentage of the other. We now flip back here to the, you could say at least 3/4 as long. I would say yes, because the alternative is less, usually much less than 2/3 as long. And it didn't look like that at all. So when we do that, we just drop one. So you can see sometimes it's not even that useful of a character, except in a certain circumstances. So for example, if I get rid of that, then I believe Melita, which is the closest thing lookalike to Andrena. No, it stays in. Okay, interesting. We'll come back to Melita, because Melita and Andrena are the problem children usually in telling the two apart. Although superficially, people are often lumping Achilles in with Andrena too. Okay, so continuing on, aerolium. If we look at our specimen, we're going to just look at the aerolium again, and we will see, we can get a good shot here. And we can get this more magnified. So tarsal claws, this is the last tarsal segment. tarsal claws on either side, which sometimes are useful, not that useful though, it turns out. And then in between is this pad-like structure, which varies, but it is a structure, not just hairs. So it has it. Any of the legs can be used for that. So it's present. And when we click on it, it doesn't do anything for us. But in other groups, it does. And again, this also points out that there are many different pathways you can take in a guide like this to an answer. So you can decide, like, I'm not going to bother with tarsal claw things right now because I don't like it, or I think it's not that important. And you may end up having to come back to it to separate things out. But there's no rules that you're doing what we do, which is start at the top, go to the bottom. You totally should be at some point jumping around and looking if you can get these lists down to just a few genera in this case, or species, hitting search and moving to a final guide where you get an answer. Your goal is a streamlined but conservative approach to identification, not simply following a bunch of rules. I think that's broader implications. Don't follow just the rules. Question authority. Let's see. Legs, claws, simple shape. We were looking at this and we saw in that picture that they did have 2 teeth, also did nothing. So again, I almost never use that in any kind of evaluation, but it can be among other groups. If we were on a pathway through, I think, megachilidae specimens, it might be useful. Or maybe we should just get rid of it off this first page. So we control what you're presented with during the front page. We're going to measure the specimen again, and I'm looking for my ruler, and I'm going to pretend you can see this. I'm going to put it backwards so I can see it. And I'm looking at this, and I'm uncurling the specimen in my mind. If I'm not uncurling it, it's 9 millimeters. If I uncurl it, I'm going to say it's somewhere between 10 and 11. So I'm going to say that it is both 10 and 11 millimeters. And it's a female, right? Male's not appropriate. 10 and 11. Again, as we mentioned the other time, this is not that useful. Look at the green numbers. A lot of the genera are scored for these middle sections. It's only when you get to the extremes, really big, really small, that you're going to use this to discriminate. It got rid of 1, I don't know what, but I'm surprised Perdita is still in there. Interesting. Okay, so now we're out of questions on the first page that we care to answer, so we can hit simplify. This is a good genus because doesn't have a lot of great characters unless you know the one magic character for the females. The males are going to be a real slog, and we'll do one of those. So we recreated a guide of just these 9, and in this guide, all the questions that have been answered have been pushed to the bottom. All the questions that don't separate this group are off the island. And what remains are questions that could be used to separate this out. This has length of male B, which is not a male, but we in no way are discriminating males from females. So you'll have to use your smarts to say that's not an appropriate one. We're skipping that again. Okay, female leg pollen carrying hairs. Location. Okay, lots of variability, as I mentioned, and your heavy scopal hairs for one species is light scopal hairs in another. So this presumes that you have some understanding of what scopal hairs are. So we have, this is for administration when we're testing things out, and it's still there. I don't know why. Scopal hair is present, or no scopal hair is present. So what happens when we do that? We are left with Epialoides, super rare Macropus nest parasite. Why? It's a nest parasite. It doesn't have any scopal hairs because it doesn't gather pollen. Okay, we put it back. So this is, again, you can play around with turning these things on and off. So now we look on femur, as we saw.
No question. Well, one question in the queue, but just hit that one.
Okay. And so we look on the femur, and as we notice, it did have scopal hairs, pollen-carrying hairs on the femur. There's Andrena, Colites mellita. Okay. But we also noticed that it was on the tibia. So this is where this playing around. Andrena is there too, because it has it both on the femur and on the tibia. But the case of scopal hairs on the femur is the rarer case, helps discriminate. There is no question that it did or didn't have it on the femur. I could score for both, but why would I do that, right? Because I can jump to 3 if it simply has pollen-carrying hairs on femur, and I am sure about that. Again, if you're not sure, you can skip the question, or you could have clicked both. Like, am I looking at scopal hairs or am I not? Is a valid question. And again, if you're unsure, don't answer the question, or answer only the sections that you feel confident about. Okay, so I just dropped down to 3. It makes sense to me, rather than we can keep answering these questions. Why not simplify again? Now I have a guide of just 3 genera to separate out, and these are all this blue stuff. These are jumps to questions that may or may not be useful. That again, as you get used to the guide, you may have in mind, I want to go to, labral shape, and you just would find it here, because there's always a format with the general to specific body parts being listed. So here are all the head ones, for example, in the same area. And then you can click on these, and it just jumps you to the place that has the question, and then you could answer that and be done with it. But in this case, we're not presuming that you have any insider information. We're skipping the male. We're skipping the shortcuts for families. We're skipping the shortcuts for superfamilies, and now, or subfamilies. And now we're down to male and well, it's not a male, so we're skipping that. Female, head, mandible, number of teeth. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So when we're talking number of teeth in bees, and the older versions of many guys would talk about simple. Okay, when they say simple, that means there's only the end of the mandible, which could be called a tooth, but is in a lot of ways, no one would call that a tooth normally. It would be just a blade, and they refer to it as the simple state. And then, like you'll see in Andrena, I have to change to the microscope. As you'll see in Andrena, you have a second tooth, but when you're starting out, it's like, that's not a tooth, that's some kind of bump. So any projection on, I don't know if I can get a good mandible shot here easily. So this again is where holding things out with your fingers. I'm going to look for a specimen with its mandibles out. So for just this reason, a lot of people do spread the mandibles of bees. It's time consuming though, so you have to balance that, because sometimes the mandible and the tongue in particular are very useful. Darn it, I don't see any that are, let's see if I can flip this specimen upside down. I don't see any that are have the mandibles spread. We never spread the mandibles. Mike Arduzer, champion mandible spreader, but we're volume operation. Okay, so here's an upside down bee. We're bringing it up. Oh, look, we can see something here. So this is sort of this is why you would want to spread mandibles. Why you would not want to is it takes a long time, and you have to do it when they're fresh. Try that now on a dried specimen, and something is going to break. So let's do some orientation here. Okay, Clypeus, and this is actually good to learn too. The labrum is here, and partially hidden by the mandible or mandibles, which are folded. This is the folding over the top, and this is underneath. And a paper which we have yet to publish, but some of you contributed to, shows that it's completely random, although why people care about this, it's obscure, that the left or the right mandible goes over atop the other mandible. And in any case, the labrum, which is a reasonably good character, is almost always hidden in most specimens because the mandibles are closed. And so that automatically makes it less of a good specimen, even though in some of the classic texts, that is a dichotomous point, long versus short. But how do you know? Because it's hidden. So if you know, you can use that character in the DL guides. And if you don't, you skip it. So this section here is what's known in Andrena as the labral process. And this turns out to be another really good but tricky to figure out character. So it doesn't really define it, at least it's not in the guide, as a character that whether it has one or not. So other bees don't have labral processes, but Andrena is famous for its labral processes, and whether it's slightly emarginate or slightly cut out or V-shaped or rounded out or a couple other kinds of states, turns out to be very important. Anyway, almost always you can see, and pretty much always, you can see the labral process, even though you can't see the labrum. Okay, so, and this is tongue stuff, which we'll get to some tongue stuff at some point, maybe, but it's a little bit hard. There's, and I actually I'm really poor at the architectural names of the tongue things.
Can you point out the label process again?
Yeah, here's my hard to see pointer. I'm gonna outline, so clipial rim, okay, so that's the rim of the clipius, which is the last big plate on the head there, and underneath it is the labrum. Okay, so this is all labrum, including the part hidden by the mandibles, but the labral process, meaning it's the thing that sticks above the labrum. It's not elevated in any great extent, but it is elevated enough that it's clearly defined. I'm now going to use the cursor to define it. So if we follow what I'm doing, this is all the labral process. I'm going to go around again. There's the emargination. In this case, other species have a different shape at the tip, but that labral process is a key thing for identifying your Andrena. Back to the mandible. All right, so what we have is a dirty specimen, folded mandible, lots of hairs, and I can't tell you exactly what's going on here at the tip. So I would change it. I'll change some shapes here. This looks like the hairs. So hairs are coming off part of the labrum, whatever the features are below, behind the labrum. This cheek area. So there's the eye. This is the cheek area through here. And this is part of the mandible. So the base of the mandible has hairs, the cheek has hairs, and sometimes the tongue has hairs. But most of this is from the mandible and the cheek, and they can interfere out here, and it makes things hard to see. So here again, this is all the mandible. The base of the mandible is wide, attaches down here next to the eye, and has interesting attachments to make it work, which is basically swings out, swings back. And so we're trying to find the tip. So it's hard to see here. This is probably the tip here, but I'm not even 100% sure. So I'm going to change the angle a little bit, and we'll see if we can. 5 minutes, by the way. 5 minutes. Okay, then I'm going to stop, even though we have not even gotten through one genus. But this is a big genus, and if you don't have an impression that there's not a lot going on, you should by now. All right, I'm going to stop here. This is not the greatest look, and we can look at others. Mandible, Okay, over there, if we look, here is our labral process again, right there. We're going to take the mandible out. This is the tip of the mandible here. This is the other mandible. This mandible is lapping that mandible. This mandible in this specimen, because the mandibles are relatively short, you cannot see the tip. Other species have really long mandibles and they will cross out and you can see the tip. So here I see this. With some imagination, I'm going to say I see a secondary mitten-like tooth. Would it be the term for any projection like that? If I didn't know anything, I wouldn't probably swear to that. And we don't have time, I think, at this point, because I'm going to let people ask questions to define that. But let's go back to the guide, and we're going to say 1 tooth, 2 teeth, or 3. I believe some and a couple Andrena have 3. That didn't even help us, right? This is a very common case, 2 teeth. So label process. So there we are. Head label process. Latitudinal and distance greater than longitudinal. 2, 1, 1. So that should separate out something. Now it varies by Andrena. So some of these are, that did not help actually. Wonder what happens when I click the ones here. Long. Okay, that got rid of Calides. And what about equal? Probably also just gets rid of Calides. So apparently Melita probably has not been scored because we didn't know about all the different cases for a label process at all. Not super helpful unless you had a long label process. So female head facial fovea absent. And it's Melita. So there's our Melita versus Andrena characteristic present. And we have 2. See it right here? Pay attention, it can be very narrow. This is the case, for example, I should really stop here. In some of the species, Andrena facial fovea, in the very slot-like, super slot-like, way more than any Andrena would have, Hylaeus on there. There's more to see here, but I think I'm just going to stop because we will continue to cover these details and cover the characters because you will be using them, most of these, over and over again in some kind of context. And I think I would have liked to have seen more information about what I'm looking at so my confidence gained. You can chat or email Claire about approaches and like, oh, this is really boring or whatever. And we might change it, but we're listening to you. We talk about it all the time. Any questions, Claire?
So while we have the microscope and whatnot up, I want to ask the group if there's anything microscope or key oriented before I go into the one question that is just Sam's mug up on the screen. Going.
Should I stop sharing? Or can you do that?
If you want to, I think you should be able to unmute. I don't understand your question.
Hi, thanks. Okay. I don't know if you're talking to me, but I will just ask my question. When I went through the keys and we got to the bottom with length, so we got to sort of, number 15, length of male B. And then for my own specimen, that, brought me down to 20 species because I didn't do the length. How did you get to that second set of characteristics that you were just doing with the teeth and the other characteristics that you started to score on after length?
Okay, so in all but the simplest guides, you're dealing with so many genera or species that you have tons of questions that are going to be necessary to completely differentiate all the different members of that class. So rather than putting them all up on the first page, we've just put a useful subset, let's call it, okay? And then when you get down to your, whatever the number is, it could be 20, you can do this anytime. On the left-hand side, at the top of the species list is a button called Simplify. There you go. I'm seeing a thumbs up. So you would just click that and it would, that's where the guide gets recreated, brings up the additional characters that you don't see on the front page. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, and the question that we had was just, can you do again your quick show of how you very technically measure a bee?
Yeah. Should I unmute or unshare?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna, let's see, what did I do with my oh, there it is. Okay, you do this any ruler. I'm just using a clear one because I use the background of the computer to highlight and silhouette the specimen, and that works for me. But you totally can do this with a opaque ruler. So if you look, here's a specimen. Problem is it's curved, right? Because that's how it naturally dried. It's not been flattened. I mean, some people do that, and that's great. But a lot of times you end up with a specimen that is, you know, just like this. And the whether the head is projecting out or projecting back, problematic, right? Because that changes the specimen. Sometimes the abdominal segments can retract or expand. That's usually not as big a deal, but it all makes for the notion of that is relatively imprecise to get a clear measurement of length. So rather than do anything fancy, what I do is I take the specimen and I hold it up against the ruler. I'm doing this in reverse so that maybe you can see some of this. I just hold it up against the ruler. I'm not looking at it on the microscope. I'm just holding up against the ruler. I get an idea of the curled up length in this case. And then I, in my mind, uncurl it and add whatever I think is a reasonable additional millimeter or two, or sometimes a couple more than that, depending on how curled the specimen is. And then, because that is also very imprecise, then I usually bracket my answer, sometimes by 3. So if I say, well, if I did all that mind stuff about it, and I'm going to say it's 10 millimeters, it's not really 10 millimeters, right? It could be all kinds of things. So I don't want to pretend I have more precision than I really do. So I'm going to score it for 9, 10, and 11. Sometimes, you know, you might feel a little more strongly that you've nailed it, but bracketing it is conservative and preserves an answer that your guess, I know what the exact millimeters on this might have obscured. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure if the person who asked is still in the chat, but maybe they will refresh on that.
Okay. What are we looking for specifically? So,
That was it. And we don't have any other questions right now.
okay.
And we're 3 minutes after 2.
Okay. All right. So Claire will post this on Dan Carr. Thank you, Dan, very much for you know, hosting all these videos.
And oh, can you? And so if you joined us late, the big announcement is when we told you last week that we could send you bees, we are tapped out. We will let you know if we can open that offer up again. But if you've sent me your address as of today before the class, you're going to get some bees. Otherwise, we'll let you know if we can do that again. And then also stay tuned for, I'm still working out how we can set up a Microsoft Teams so that we can speak more collaboratively with each other beyond just the chat of this group. Something that people were requesting in the bee boxes were if we had specific species or genus or geographies or something like that. And that is not something that we can really curate to a great degree, particularly because we had such an amazing response. But I really invite you to talk amongst yourselves and see if there's another colleague in the group who have a whole bunch of Andrena that they would be willing to share or something like that. So I think those are the two major announcements at the moment. Somebody is really trying to get a hold of Sam. And I'll send out a follow-up email as I do. Videos will be posted by Friday, if not almost immediately. Yeah. If you have any other questions, comments, or concerns, you know where to find me.
Thank you all.